Hello. Dear Jenny, it's wonderful seeing you for the second time in a row, 2 days. I really appreciate it. I think your keynote yesterday was great inspiration also for the session after you. And I think that also Renate enjoyed the discussion regarding COVID. Can we test the voice? Is it functioning? Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Good.
And we see the library. It's a lot of, not so much data inside, but different literature, I would say. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the last part of our European Data Summit. And it's really my greatest pleasure that Jeni Tennison finds time to close the European Data Summit. It's really strange. The Britain is leaving the European Union and we are closing the European Data Summit with Jeni Tennison from ODI from London. What a coincidence. But as you, Jeni, know, we are not fighting, but we are arguing for many, many years that we need similar institution in Germany. We are simply, we really appreciate all the projects in the previous years and your dedicated work. Especially it was interesting to us the connection that you have with the Cabinet Office in the beginning, how you established the institute, what was the mission, and so on. And you have already made a couple of years of experience working in the institute. You're following also the political landscape. But you're also following what's going on in the data debate in Europe, and I think when you see where we started, like 4 or 5 years ago, and where are we now, I think that in all these projects were all the ODI Institute, Open Data Institute involved, and it was every time really your opinion was highly appreciated, not only in the European Commission but also in different circles. I'm saying in different occasions that actually we had the initial start, the initial push for the Open Data Act in Germany with the speech of Nigel Shadbolt at that time, and really at that time the inspirational talk of Matt Hancock. He simply said, "Tear down this wall," the clear message to his colleagues in Berlin, and now it's time to sum up, so to say, and to ask you about your experiences with Open Data Institute, why you established it, what was the clear objective at that time, what has changed since then, and maybe in the later part, maybe you could give us some suggestions or some recommendation, not only to me, but also to policymakers. Andreas is here from the Federal Ministry of Economy, Anna also from the Federal Ministry of Economy. Why actually it makes sense for Germany to have similar institution like ODI. The virtual floor is for the second time yours.
Thanks very much, Pedro. And yeah, so I've prepared some slides which are really about reflecting the what we have done at ODI, how we've shifted at ODI, and a bit more of a reflection about, if you're trying to advance open data or data policy in a country, what kind of setup, I think from my experience, you might try to generate. So I'll just try sharing my screen, and hopefully then be able to run through those slides. Can you see that?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, just again, I'll reiterate a bit about ODI. So we were founded in 2012. In fact, it was my 8-year work anniversary yesterday. So that's when we really started to get going. And I would reflect that we always see ourselves as an international organization. We try to make sure that the work that we do is relevant internationally. As well as working within individual countries and working with partners in those individual countries, because we also recognise that context can really change in different places. But we were set up by the UK government, so obviously that has could say distorted or influenced very strongly the work and the focus that we've had. When we were first set up, then our vision was to show the value of open data. It was very much focused on open data and on getting the open data that had been published by government used by startups. And as I'll describe over time, then that has shifted. We now describe our vision as kind of really broadly a world where data works for everyone. And we have focused our mission and on working with companies and governments. So that's the big influential data stewards and holders, to build an open and trustworthy data ecosystem. And I'll come back to the importance of kind of openness and trustworthiness in a bit, and why that shift has been made. Also, just to give a sense of scale, this year then we'll probably reach a turnover of about 6.5 million euros. That is, I adapted currency for you guys, and that was from an initial 2 million a year investment from the UK government, which we supplemented with various other strands of income, which again I'll come on to funding model in a bit. And we have about 55 people on payroll, plus a range of associates and fellows and partners that we work with, and so on. Right. So my the first reflection that I wanted to make was that organizations working in the open data space, or in the data space more generally, it can fill different kinds of roles. So, it's quite important for there to be a group or organization inside government that is running core government infrastructure. So things like data portals, or really setting what the parameters are for what good looks like, which can't be done from outside government. Understanding policy, writing legislation, really driving data policy forward from inside government. It's also really important, I think, to have some organizations outside government which are real campaigners, who are holding government to account against legislation, against their policies, who are advocating for better practices, who are shouting, who are throwing stones sometimes. And then I think it's important to have some organizations that are in the middle, who are can act as a critical friend, can provide support to help government to get better, can do research, and but aren't quite so loud, don't do quite such loud advocacy as those on the outside. And ODI, then we've very definitely taken that in the middle path. What I'd say is that it's important for all of those to meet all of those kinds of needs. And the first question I would be asking is, what needs it? How are you filling each of those different kinds of needs? Are there already really strong advocates outside of government? In which case you don't need to create new ones, but perhaps if that's the missing piece, you need to create an organization that's really independent and really going to hold government to account. Similarly, it's very difficult from the outside, from not being in government, to actually make policy or run core infrastructure unless you've got a good team inside government. So if that's the gap, then that's the gap to fill. So think about where there are gaps in that kind of strand, and where you need to fill them. As I say, in the UK, when we were first set up, then there was a fairly good inside government stream. There was fairly good outside government stream. So organisation campaigns and newspapers, organisations like Open Knowledge Foundation at that time were very strong at kind of My Society and others at holding government to account. Over time, then those organisations have fluctuated in their strengths, but we've always been kind of positioned as this critical friend in the middle. Second thing is about scope, and again, just to talk about where we started and where we've ended up. So first of all, I'd say that in early days of open data in the UK, then there was and I would characterise it as most open data conversations worldwide have been very focused on government open data. where we believe that a sustainable data ecosystem needs to have government benefiting from open data as well as providing it for others to exploit and take advantage of. So we very definitely have positioned ourselves as working beyond government, working with the private sector in particular to get them being more open with their data. And I say more open to move on to my second point, because not all data can be open. Some really valuable data needs to be shared in different ways, but it can't be made open for anyone to access, use, and share. So we've moved our focus, in fact, in about the first couple of years of ODI operation, away from just looking at open data towards data being as open as possible. And then the third area is where we've shifted our focus from that initial vision, is really around looking beyond issues about access to data. So beyond stuff about making data as open as possible, but also talking about harms, also talking about trustworthiness, and it's very hard to do that without also getting dragged into issues around algorithmic accountability and the role of AI and so on. So that would be my second kind of set of reflections. If you're setting up an organization, what's its scope, and is it only going to focus on open government data? If so, it's going to be quite a tight, small organization. In order to do that, there won't be much, and it can limit the conversations that you can have to be very focused on just that part. Next set of reflections are about activities. So at ODI, then because we're in that kind of middle section, as I described, this critical friend, we provide advice and consultancy, best practices, processes, prototypes, documents, guidance, and all of those kinds of things. We provide training. When we initially started out, then we envisaged doing master's courses or doctoral certificates. And as time has gone on, we realized fairly quickly that kind of formal academic training wasn't where the gap was in the market, at least around open data, and that we could reach more people by doing more kind of training in job. So shifted our training courses to be looking at that. And over time, as interest has changed, then we've shifted the type of training that we provide to, for example, being more around data ethics right now. We also do research and development, and that covers a whole range of things, because when you're talking about data, it's not just technical things you need to care about, it's also kind of economic effects of data, how the market works, what kind of data governance you need, and so on. So quite a broad research and development program. We have a group that is specifically focused on public policy, on advocacy and operationalizing government policy. We have a section of our work that is supporting startups and innovation programs, accelerators, challenges of various kinds. And as we're looking forward, we're looking at what kind of infrastructure should we be providing. So for example, hosting data or data discovery tools or validators or those kinds of things. And also, there's also room around certification and auditing and the positioning of organizations as regulators as well. So I included the bottom two as ones that are things to consider, rather than ones that I can definitely say are important and working, which the top are, because that's what we've been doing. But I think this is important. What kinds of provision is there in the market in general? And how is the organisation going to be? What kinds of activities is it going to do? Where's its remit going to be? And all of those choices also then determine what kind of funding model you can have. And, I talked yesterday about data institutions needing to be sustainable, where any organization needs to be sustainable. And this has been one of the things that has been challenging for ODI over the years. And we've fluctuated up and down in size and capacity because of different kinds of funding streams coming on and off. So, we were set up with some core government funding, and I maintain that if a government is invested in having a good data ecosystem, and then supporting organizations like ODI is one of the ways in which it can make that happen. It's a core, I would view that as a core national capability. But I would say that for those organizations, we run into this. It can mean a perceived conflict of interest. It means that it's when an organization receives money direct from government, it can be hard for that organization to hold government to account. So that has to be factored in. The way we get around that is by having multiple funding streams, so that we're not solely reliant on government funding and therefore can have more of an independent voice. The other streams we rely on, so we have some philanthropic funding, often that can be international in scope, but it can be difficult to get philanthropic funding, we find, because philanthropic funders tend not to want to invest in kind of infrastructural organizations, tend to be wanting to be investing in ones that are a bit closer to the front line, if you like, closer to affecting people's lives. It can also be challenging because most philanthropic funding is around issues of social justice, which tend not to be very tech positive, certainly at the moment. And so when you have a bit more of a balanced kind of thrust towards innovation and the importance of data, then it can be hard to get philanthropic funding that supports that. We have a whole bunch of project work, and I believe this is really important in ensuring that we remain relevant. And also, I find that when people pay for support, then they adopt that support and embed it into what they do. But of course, having projects means having sales and delivery capacity beyond the kind of the flexibility that a core kind of fund can provide. And sometimes those projects can be, again, there can be a tension between taking on work that matches or doesn't match the mission and the degree to which those projects advance your mission. And then the final stream of funding that we have at ODI and that we've experimented with in various ways is membership. So having actual organizations and individuals paying small annual amounts in order to be members of ODI and be able to be badged like that. And that has huge advantages for us in terms of just not very many financial advantages, but it has good advantages in terms of getting buy-in and creating a community. But it is hard to maintain value for members, particularly with the kind of when there's limited finances. It isn't a lucrative thing to do, and many membership organisations struggle. So that was it. I just thought I'd take you through some of my reflections around what's been important and useful at ODI, and I'm very, very happy to have a discussion. You know, you can have it just there in the room, or I'm happy to contribute to it however would be helpful.
Okay, I'm sure we're going to have some questions from the audience also later. So are maybe already some questions to Jeni? I'm not seeing currently. I see Shiv over there, but before we go to Shiv, I have one question. Since you have established the institute because obviously there was a need for that kind of institution, do you consider any similar institution in the UK to be a competitor of ODI in some or another way? And there is another issue it really matters to us. I mean, obviously you have, as in Germany, many institutions who are really dedicated concretely on data protection. But data protection is also in the scope of your work. So what's the difference between those organizations and ODI?
Yeah, so that's those are really good questions. So obviously, when we were created in 2012, then there were already some organisations on the landscape, and I would point to, for example, Open Knowledge Foundation as being a very strong one in the UK at that point. But also organisations like, say, Nesta, which it focuses around innovation. and over time, then there have been more and more organizations that have kind of popped up. So organizations like the Ada Lovelace Institute, the Digital Catapult, which was instituted at around the same time, the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation, which came along in the past 3 years, and so on. So that there are many organizations that are active in the data space. And as you say, many of them are active around data ethics and algorithmic accountability and data protection type issues. And as I say, that's in part because those are the topics that are hot right now, right? And they're new organizations that have been set up in order to address them. I'd say that we also compete with or have overlaps with organizations like the Turing Institute, which are researchers, so overlap with our research and development program, and organizations like the big consultancy companies, which also provide advice and training and guidance for organizations, particularly commercial ones that are going through different kinds of things. So we have lots of overlaps with lots of other kinds of organizations. And I would say that managing those is an ongoing, especially when new organizations come along, is an ongoing activity. And requires you to have quite a lot of flexibility in adjusting your focus so that you can focus on areas that are new rather than ones that overlap. And what we found successful is having a focus on working in partnerships. So where there are organizations that we overlap with, on the areas of overlap, we try and work with them rather than competing with them, because in most cases we're all aiming towards the same kind of thing. So yes, lots of organizations, lots of competitors, but we try and turn them into partners.
We have one question from Shiv, and then we have Tori.
Hi, Jenny. Just to ask perhaps a slightly pointed question, if you don't mind, which is, obviously you started around the same time that Facebook had its IPO. And as you watched GAFA grow, you've obviously seen more data than ever, very commercially valuable data at that, being siloed and not open at all. Do you think that your strategy and sort of philosophical outlook has sort of failed really to challenge that situation, and then obviously we've ended up in the place that we have today?
So I don't think that Facebook's business model and practices are ODI's fault. So that I don't think. I certainly think that the issues that we see around good data governance, around the impact of those big technology companies on our society have become more prevalent over the past 8 years. And as I've described, then part of our shift towards talking more around trustworthiness and good data governance practices has been to try to address those. As far as openness goes, I mean, we try to encourage and help those organizations, even those big organizations like Google, like Amazon, Facebook, and I mean, you may know that we've just entered into a partnership with Microsoft. Try to get them to open up more of their data. Obviously, personal data isn't data that they can open up. So the work that we do around data institutions is all to try to encourage them to do that. But I also think I'd reflect back on my point that I made at the start about where ODI is positioned. It is absolutely essential for there to be those other organizations that are shouting much more loud for our strategy to work. It's essential for there to be those other organizations that are shouting loudly about the behaviors and practices of those big tech, and government actually acting on those things as well. It's a limitation of being a critical friend that you can't shout as loudly as people who are not critical, are not friends, just critical, and so I view it as us all working together to do that, rather than a failure of our strategy to do that, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Jenny. Now, Tori from Technology Foundation have one more question. Where is the micro, please? You know each other, I believe, or?
I don't think we know each other. I follow you on Twitter. So hi, my name's Victoria Burke. I'm from the Technologie-Stiftung Berlin. My question has to do in the direction of like the activities that you offer. And so when I've listened in on some of the discussions of like an ODI in Germany, I have to be honest, I'm a little skeptical sometimes, because one thing I feel like we don't need more of in Germany is more studies, like more high-level academic discussions of, in a broad sense, what value open data or better data sharing, et cetera, would generate for the country. I think a lot of people have an understanding of this, and where we really falter then in Germany is the actual implementation. So like on the level of local governments or even in the federal government, and so I work in the city government in Berlin, like where I see that things don't work is government officials saying, okay, that's great, I'm convinced that we should do this. How? How do I do it? What are the processes that I actually need to create and follow? What is specifically the data that I have that you would say that I should be publishing? And so I'm curious, because I do feel like the ODI, as far as I'm aware, offers more practical, like applied assistance, not just high-level discussions. And so I'm just curious how these discussions go internally. Like, does the ODI make like a concerted effort to not just be engaged in high-level academic discussions? Like, is this a priority for the organization to stay connected to the actual governmental organizations at all levels to understand the specific challenges in their context? Just how do you navigate this?
Yeah, very, very definitely. Thanks for the question. So, where we do research and development, and we do some research and development, we try to make it very applied research and development, and in particular, the development part is important for us. We try to develop tools and frameworks and ways of thinking, ways of exploring topics that are then useful for organizations. So, for example, out of the R&D program that we've been running over the last 4 years, we've created a whole bunch of tools that are useful in a local government setting, including a business case canvas in order to help persuade the people higher up in your organization that they need to invest in this thing, data ethics canvas to help explore the data ethics implications, various checklists for helping work through how to scale projects from one city or local authority or local government organization to others, and so on. We try to create practical tools, practical guidance. We call them practical advocacy tools because we also embed within them our, our drive towards openness and trustworthiness. So very definitely on creating those tools. And then the other thing that we do, which is where I find the services part of what we offer powerful, is that we can provide training around those tools, we can provide workshops around them, which then means that they can be actually adopted and embedded in an organization, whereas, if you just publish some stuff on a website, it can be difficult to adopt. So for me, then there's a very kind of coherent strategy in the way in which we have the kind of services and more consultancy offer to help support those organizations, and the research and development which generates the tools that we use within that consultancy and training.
Many thanks, Jenny. Do we have more questions to Jenny, maybe? Then I have definitely many questions for you. You know the data landscape, so to say, in Germany. We have really renewed institutions in different data fields. Do you see any similar institution in Germany? Can you recognize a similar institution with a similar mandate as you have in the UK?
I don't think I know the German landscape well enough in order to answer that question. Okay. I'm afraid. So, the organizations that I'm kind of closest to and aware of within in Germany are in part the groups that are like the Open Knowledge Foundation Deutschland, who are on that more who are providing some of that practical support, as I understand it, providing some of that practical support as well as some of the advocacy. Various think tanks that we have come across and interacted with, which are similar, but very maybe not only focused on data in the same way as we are, maybe have a bit more broader view. And then, you know, our founders would point at Fraunhofer and say, well, that's the kind of organization that we at ODI should be. So that kind of link with industry is a kind of as an ideal. So, but you would know better than I would, I think, what those things are.
We had many thoughts to define potential objectives of a potential open data institute in Germany, and we have in mind, of course, the European obligations when it comes to the open data PSI directive. We have also our legislation, but if we see objectively what we have achieved in the public administration in the last couple of years, the results are not that fantastic, to be honest. And those are not my words. I mean, there are also reports by the government where the government is critical of what have we achieved in the last 2-3 years, and whether this provision works at all. One of the reasons why it doesn't work is because we have, of course, certainly problems with awareness in the public administration, but also maybe knowledge is missing. So our thoughts are that maybe, because I've mentioned the relationship with the cabinet office, we are wondering whether an institution like ODI could maybe facilitate the process somehow of making open data more visible in the public administration, in the government, raising the awareness, but not also as Tori said at political meta level, but also with concrete examples. What's your opinion on this?
So one thing that I would say is that it is extremely difficult to, as I try to emphasize, it's extremely difficult as an outside organization to create motivation inside government. And I would also be looking at the capability within the kind of within the government structures to and the leadership within the government structures to drive the agenda forward like that. When it comes to, you know, providing practical help, it's easy to do that as an external organization, as an independent organization. But if you're never asked to help, if you're never approached for help, if there are never tenders that you can apply for, then there's very little that you can grab hold of to actually put your to provide that help into the organization. And so I think that and like I say, creating that motivation might come from good leadership within government, or it might come from actually just real campaign on the outside to drive it up the agenda as something of real importance within government. But the insider type organization that provides the nice help and guidance, that is there to hold your hand through publishing data and help recommend good engagement strategies to you, those like ODI is, those aren't the types of organizations that can create motivation so easily. So that would be the only kind of caveat that I put over having that shape organization in Germany.
I have one more question in this regard. Since we have some success in arguing that we need Open Data Institute in Germany, in some draft version of the German strategy on data, there is some mentioning that the German government is supposed to check this possibility and necessity till beginning of next year. I think that the mandate is given to the Federal Ministry of Interior. So I believe you will be definitely somehow asked, I hope, from the Federal Ministry of Interior, what would be the advantage of an open data institute for Germany. But let's say, worst case scenario, we don't convince the German government and they say we see no necessity because we have complex system, we have federal system, and open data institute would make sense maybe when it comes to the relationship with at federal level, but still the most of the data are in municipalities at local level. Let's say if we don't convince the German government of collaborating more closely with a potential new institution, does it make sense establishing data institution like Open Data Institute if the government, let's say, is not maybe willing to open up and to collaborate on this subject?
So I think in those circumstances, as I described, you have to be creating the motivation somehow, right? And maybe in those cases, then what you really need is more of an advocacy organization, one that is going to be, pointing at, doing ranks and indexing of Germany against other countries, of different cities within Germany against each other to try and get some competition going, that is going to be pointing out where data is missing, where you're not adhering to the PSI directive or the Open Data Directive, one that is a bit more adversarial as a way of creating the motivation if that doesn't exist. Because, as I say, if you have one that is a very friendly organization, then it can't create the motivation itself.
I have one more last question that's regarding the prefix of your institution. It's called open. Is it in favor or not that much in the current data landscape and discussion all around data?
Yeah, we've struggled with that quite a lot because, of course, as I described, we moved beyond just talking about open data fairly early on in our existence. And so, one way in which we describe it is that we care about openness in general. We care about, being transparent and talking about what you're doing, sharing what you're doing so that others can learn about it. And that openness is always part of our DNA. We advocate now for an open data ecosystem as we do a trustworthy one. And so the brackets, if you like, around the terms, it's the Open Data Institute rather than the Open Data Institute, but it's also why we often try to just use ODI as our name, so we don't get into too many of those details.
And maybe last comment I've learned at that time from Peter Wells, the concept of open, shared, and close. Have you succeed in translating this concept in the society? Is it that difficult to explain to people what does it mean to have the open data, to have a data spectrum?
I think that the thing that is hardest to explain to people is that open data is not that just making data available on the web does not make it open, and that open data requires an open license and very explicit kind of permissions that you can reuse data in particular ways, and so. It's not hard for people to understand that data gets shared. It's harder for them to understand why that openness bit really, really matters for unlocking the kind of value that we see.
Many thanks. Since I think there are no more questions in the room, I can tell you that all the people are listening to you really carefully. It's really the last session of the summit. We really appreciate your input yesterday, the keynote and discussion right now. Unfortunately, because of the restrictions, even the strongest open data protagonists couldn't join the discussion. For instance, Christian Horn couldn't come from Hamburg, but I believe all of them are, I'm sure that are listening carefully to you. And not only Christian, but Marie Janssen, also the friends from the Bertelsmann Foundation. Really appreciate your advice. We will keep in touch, and we hope that maybe it will be enough inspiration also for the German government to get in touch directly with you and address potential open issues.
Yeah, I was going to say, please do, if you want to have further conversations about this, very happy to continue to share our experience and to work with you around whatever kind of organization gets set up.
So basically, I am always saying that we need institutions with a holistic approach, and that's the way how I consider the Open Data Institute. You have really the bright view, and that's something what I'm personally missing, at least in Germany. Once again, many thanks. Best greetings to all of your colleagues, and we keep in touch. And
thank you very much.
Have a nice day. Ciao, ciao. So. So it was really a pleasant final talk of the European Data Summit, and it's I can hardly imagine that we have such a intensive 3 days from competition and new competition tools till data trust and data altruism to some characteristic when it comes to publishing high value data. So it's really that the scope was huge. I hope that discussion made sense, and I hope that we can meet next year again and we are looking forward to what the European Commission is going to offer in the legislative process at the end of the year. We truly hope that all these initiatives will have some success. It's in our European interest. And there is one thing I must mention, that I could organize this European Data Summit thanks to the support of the European Commission and especially the representation of the European Commission in Berlin, and many thanks for the whole support. I'm really sorry that the connection with the Commissioner didn't function the way we wanted, but still I'm really grateful that we did it at the end in a special format. Many thanks to my colleagues, especially to Slavo for he's hopefully listening to me outside, for the support. To the European guests, despite all restrictions, coming to Berlin, doing all negative tests, please be safe on your way home. And many thanks to all of you. Now I would like to invite you for a small reception. And let's continue the discussion with a glass of wine. Many thanks.